Welcome to What the F Happened, Fraud and Financial Crime Deconstructed, a Defend podcast where we break down what's actually happening across fraud, scams, AML, and financial crime.
Each episode cuts through the noise to explain the tactics, trends, and real-world impact behind the headlines, so you're better prepared for what comes next. Let's get into it. Imagine for a second that your job is to find a needle in a haystack. But there's a catch.
Right. Someone is constantly dumping more hay on you.
Exactly. And the hay itself is constantly changing shape. Plus, if you happen to miss the needle, well, the government might fine your company millions of dollars.
I mean, it sounds like an impossible stress stream, honestly. But for financial crime investigators working in 2026, that's literally just a Tuesday morning.
Yeah, and today we're doing a deep dive into why that system feels so fundamentally broken and, more importantly, how high-performing teams are actually fixing it.
I've got some really fascinating source material for this.
We do. We are unpacking this comprehensive playbook by Feng Yu from DataVisor. It's basically a roadmap detailing why fraud and anti-money laundering case management systems they're breaking down under modern pressure.
And it outlines this 7-step framework to actually survive it.
Right. So our mission today is to cut through all the industry jargon, figure out how financial crime has evolved, and understand the mechanics of why the old tools just, cannot keep up anymore.
To do that effectively, though, we really need to establish a quick baseline. Because fraud and anti-money laundering, or AML, they're two very different functions.
Even though they operate in the same ecosystem.
Exactly. I mean, so fraud asks this very operational, immediate question, right? Like, did this person steal something, and how do we stop the financial loss right now? It is completely about stopping the bleeding.
Like freezing an account or blocking a wire transfer the literal second it looks suspicious.
Yes. But AML, on the other hand, asks a regulatory historical question. It's asking, is this activity indicative of money laundering, and do we need to report it to FinCEN?
So it's more about mapping out the broader criminal network to meet strict government compliance.
Right. Two completely different mandates. But as the DataVisor playbook shows, they are colliding in ways that legacy tech simply wasn't built to handle.
Reading through this playbook and looking at all these fractured legacy systems, it actually really reminds me of kintsugi.
Oh, the Japanese pottery thing.
Yeah, exactly. That art practice where if a ceramic bowl shatters, they don't just throw it away. And they don't glue it back together to try and hide the cracks either.
They rejoin the pieces with gold, right?
Right. Gold or silver lacquer. They actively highlight the fracture points and fill them with something stronger, so the repaired bowl is actually more resilient than the original ever was.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it.
That's totally what this playbook feels like. We aren't taping a broken case management system back together. We're identifying the specific points of failure and filling them with entirely new workflows.
Yeah, and to understand how to apply that gold lacquer, we first have to understand why the bowl shattered in the first place.
Which brings us to the first major structural crack.
Right. Investigators are often failing before they even open a case.
Because they're completely drowning in noise. I mean, these legacy systems are generating false positive rates, sitting anywhere between 70% and 95%.
It's staggering.
If you're listening to this and you work in any kind of triage IT, customer support, medicine, just imagine if 95 out of every 100 alerts you got were complete wastes of time.
You would develop alert blindness instantly. You just start clicking ignore.
Exactly.
And that alert overload, it's actually a symptom of a much deeper problem. It's this shift in how financial crime actually operates now.
How so?
Well, the old playbook was built for transaction monitoring. The system looked for a single bad actor doing a single bad thing, like a massive transfer over $10,000 or a login from a foreign country at 3 in the morning.
It was very rules-based, very binary.
Exactly. But criminals know those rules now.
They read the same playbooks.
They do, and they adapted. Financial crime in 2026 isn't based on single, loud events anymore. It is based on coordinated, quiet networks.
Ah, like synthetic identity rings.
Yes. Fraudsters will invent a person out of thin air, get a credit card, and spend months using it completely normally. They pay the bill on time, they buy groceries.
Just to establish a baseline of quote-unquote normal behavior.
Right. And then they use massive mule networks to move money in these tiny, structured increments that fly completely under the radar of those old binary rules.
So catching them requires a total shift to behavioral surveillance.
You have to understand what normal looks like for an entity over a long period of time and flag the really subtle deviations.
Which completely explains why reviewing an individual transaction alert is so useless now. It feels like looking at a single piece of a jigsaw puzzle through a microscope and trying to guess the whole picture.
It really does. I mean, if a sophisticated fraud ring is using 40 different accounts and 15 different devices across 3 states, a human being is never going to connect those dots when they are buried under 95% false alarms.
The human brain simply cannot process disparate data points at that scale, or speed for that matter.
No, the system is asking analysts to do work that should never reach a human desk. So the playbook proposes a 2-part structural fix here: intelligent alert triage and entity-level investigation.
Okay, break those down for me.
First, you place an AI pre-filtering layer in front of the human queue. The AI analyzes the alerts against historical behavioral patterns and basically auto-closes the low-risk noise before an analyst ever even sees it.
Okay, let me pause you there because my immediate thought is regulatory blowback,
Oh, for sure.
right? If an AI is just like silently closing security alerts in the background, regulators are going to have a field day with that lack of oversight.
They absolutely would, which is why the mechanism requires the AI to generate mandatory reason codes for every single auto-closure.
Oh, so it's not silent.
No, it doesn't just delete the alert. It appends a log saying, closed, because device ID has a 3-year history of legitimate travel to this IP address, or whatever the specific reason is. It is fully documented.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the alerts that don't get auto-closed?
The real magic happens for the alerts that do reach the human, the 5% that are actually highly suspicious.
Right, when the analyst opens that high-risk case, what do they see?
They aren't looking through your microscope anymore. The system uses graph visualization. Instead of a spreadsheet of individual transactions, the analyst sees a literal web on their screen.
A web, like a spider web.
Sort of. A central node might be an IP address, and radiating out from that node are lines connecting it to every user account, every device fingerprint, and every physical address that has ever interacted with that IP.
Oh, wow. So instead of playing whack-a-mole with 40 different isolated alerts, the investigator sees the entire fraud ring in one single view.
Yes. They can highlight the entire web and shut down all 40 accounts simultaneously.
The source material actually claims this entity-level approach can create efficiency gains of up to 100x.
Which sounds like marketing fluff until you actually see it.
Right, that is a staggering number. But when you explain the mechanics of visualizing the whole network at once, it actually makes total sense.
It changes the fundamental nature of the investigation from reactive to proactive. But once you zoom out and give investigators the ability to see that full entity, a glaring new problem pops up.
Which is?
You realize the right hand has no idea what the left hand is doing. The fraud team and the AML team are completely siloed.
Ah, the classic corporate silo. But I imagine in this context, it isn't just inefficient, it's actively dangerous.
It is. The playbook points out that fraud is very often the predicate offense to money laundering.
Right, because the money has to originate somewhere. So the proceeds of like an authorized push payment scam, an APP scam, they don't just vanish into thin air.
No, the criminals immediately move those stolen funds into their mule networks to be laundered.
And yet these teams are often working in completely fragmented environments. I think the playbook notes institutions are frequently using 4 to 6 separate tech stacks across risk departments.
Which means a fraud investigator might catch an account takeover, freeze the account, close their case, and celebrate a win.
Meanwhile, they have absolutely no idea that the AML team down the hall desperately needs that exact compromised account data to track where the rest of the laundered money is flowing.
Exactly. The criminal just slips right through the gap between the two departments.
Okay, look, if the criminal is explicitly exploiting the gap between fraud and AML, why are we tiptoeing around this? Why not just smash the two teams together?
I know, it seems obvious, right?
Put them in the same room, under one manager, with one budget. One giant financial crime super squad. Problem solved, right?
It is incredibly tempting to view merging as the silver bullet, but you absolutely cannot do it. The regulatory frameworks forbid it for very practical reasons.
Like, why?
Remember our baseline definitions from the intro?
Operational versus regulatory.
Right. The fraud team is operating under intense pressure to stop immediate operational loss. They have to freeze funds in milliseconds. The AML team is operating under strict government mandates to map networks and file suspicious activity reports to FinCEN within a rigid 30-day window.
Oh, I see.
If you merge the teams, you bleed those mandates together. An analyst focused on stopping a $500 fraud loss might inadvertently tip off a massive money laundering suspect.
Which could ruin a federal investigation?
Exactly. They have fundamentally different thresholds for action.
So you are trapped. You can't merge the teams, but keeping them siloed lets the criminals win. How do you share the data without breaking compliance?
You implement what the industry calls FRAML, the convergence of fraud and AML, but you have to do it correctly.
And what does correctly look like here?
The architecture requires separate workflows, but a shared, unified intelligence layer. The teams do not work each other's cases. However, the data flows natively between them in the background.
Okay, so how does that work in practice?
When an AML investigator opens a profile to investigate potential laundering, the platform automatically queries the shared intelligence layer and surfaces the fraud team's historical signals on that exact same entity.
Oh, so there's no copy-pasting between systems, no sending emails to ask for case files?
Exactly. They both feed into and draw from the exact same data well, but they view that data through their own specific regulatory lenses.
Okay, so we fixed the alert noise, and we have the teams sharing data through a unified layer. We are building a really solid foundation here.
We are.
But let's say this unified team catches a massive new APP scam. The fraudsters are watching, they realize their vector is burned, so they pivot to a completely new tactic overnight.
Which they always do.
Right. If the underlying software system is rigid, does all this shared data even matter if we can't update our detection rules?
This is breakdown number 3, the adaptation gap. And it is driven by what practitioners call the engineering bottleneck.
Oh man, if you are listening to this and you have ever had to submit an IKEY ticket just to change a basic drop-down menu or update a parameter in your CRM, you know exactly the pain we are about to describe.
It is that exact pain, but with millions of dollars on the line. In legacy, hard-coded systems, risk analysts will spot a brand new attack vector in real time. But they do not have the technical access to adjust the detection rules themselves. They have to file an engineering ticket.
And that ticket goes into a software development sprint cycle.
Right. The new code has to be written, placed into a staging environment, run through quality assurance testing.
And suddenly weeks or even business quarters have gone by. It's like realizing the lock on your front door is broken, but instead of just going to the hardware store and fixing it, you have to submit a permit to the city, wait for an inspector, and the approval takes 3 months.
That's exactly what it's like.
Meanwhile, the fraudsters are just casually walking in and out of your house, exploiting the known vulnerability.
Yep.
So how do institutions close this adaptation gap without swinging the pendulum too far? Because giving non-engineers the power to change live, algorithmic rules sounds like a great way to accidentally flag every single transaction in the bank and shut down the business.
It is a massive operational risk. The Playbook solves this through a combination of no-code rules and champion-challenger model learning.
Okay, what are no-code rules?
First, the platform provides a graphical interface where risk teams can configure and update rules themselves using drop-down logic, rather than writing Python or Java. They can respond to a threat in hours.
But to prevent them from accidentally breaking the bank.
The system enforces shadow testing.
Okay, walk me through the mechanics of shadow testing. How does it actually protect the live environment?
When an analyst creates a new rule, let's call it the challenger rule, it does not go live. The system runs it in the background, in the shadows, against a massive data set of historical transactions.
Okay.
Simultaneously, it runs the existing champion rule against that exact same data. The system then compares the deltas.
So it generates a mathematical report.
Exactly. It shows the analyst. If this challenger rule had been live for the last 90 days, it would have caught 15% more fraud, and the false positive rate would have dropped by 2%.
Oh, I see. So you prove the math on historical data before it ever touches a live customer account.
Precisely. Only when the challenger mathematically defeats the champion does it get promoted to the live environment.
That's incredibly smart.
And to ensure the machine learning models underlying all of this continue to get smarter, the Playbook emphasizes subtypology tagging.
Subtypology tagging. What does that actually mean in practice?
Well, in a bad system, when an analyst closes a case, they select a generic tag from a drop-down menu, like account takeover.
Right.
The AI just learns that something generally bad happened. But in a high-performing system, the tags are hyper-granular.
Like what?
The analyst tags it as account takeover via SIM swap or account takeover via credential stuffing. That granularity feeds back into the continuous learning model, telling the AI exactly which specific behavioral features to weight more heavily the next time it scans the network.
So it is constantly refining its own parameters based on the specific outcomes of closed cases.
Ex-
But taking a step back here, we are talking about letting risk teams deploy models in real time and using algorithms that learn dynamically. If we are giving the system this much autonomy, won't regulators eventually freak out about a black box making these calls?
That is arguably the most urgent issue in the entire playbook. It's driven by the FinCEN April 2026 Notice of Proposed Rulemaking.
Ah, the 2026 reckoning. What exactly is changing in the regulatory landscape?
Regulators are fundamentally shifting how they evaluate compliance programs. For years, it was check-the-box compliance. You proved to the examiner that you purchased a sophisticated transaction monitoring system, and that was mostly enough.
Basically just showing you had the tool.
Right, but the 2026 rules demand demonstrated effectiveness. Examiners do not just want to know that your AI flagged an entity, they want to know the exact mathematical and behavioral reasoning behind the flag.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here. We implement AI specifically because it can see multidimensional patterns across millions of data points that the human brain literally cannot comprehend. Right. So if an advanced neural network flags a high-value customer with a massive risk score of, say, 98 out of 100, why are we handicapping the AI by demanding it only use logic a human can understand? Shouldn't the analyst just trust the math and file the report?
Trusting the math without understanding it results in what the industry calls the undefendable decision.
The undefendable decision.
Yeah. If you have a risk score of 98, but the system is a black box and cannot show you the reasoning path, it is a massive regulatory liability.
Oh, because you have to defend it to an auditor.
Exactly. Imagine your analyst is sitting across from a federal examiner. The examiner asks, why did you file a suspicious activity report on this specific customer? If the analyst's only answer is, the computer gave them a 98, that is an immediate program deficiency.
Yeah, that makes sense. You cannot audit an algorithm you don't understand. So how does the Data Visor framework actually solve the black box?
Through explainable AI, the system is architected to produce a human-readable reasoning path for every single decision.
Like a plain English summary.
Yes. It translates the algorithmic weights into a clear narrative. Like, we flag this entity because their device fingerprint matches a known neural network, their transaction volume spiked 400% on a Tuesday, and they bypassed a geolocation check.
Wow, that's specific.
It has to be.
Yeah.
And crucially, every one of those claims must be hyperlinked and traceable back to the raw underlying transaction logs. You have to show your work.
That makes total sense. You have to be able to defend the logic. But the playbook mentions another trap here alongside the black box, the audit gap.
Ah, yes. The audit gap is basically a problem of time.
How so?
Let's say an auditor asks to see why an analyst made a specific decision on an account 6 months ago. In a legacy system, the compliance officer pulls up the account, but the dashboard shows the account as it exists today.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The customer has updated their address, new transactions have posted, old alerts have cleared. The context the analyst saw 6 months ago is completely gone.
Oh my gosh. You cannot prove they made the right call because you can no longer see what they saw. That is a terrifying vulnerability. You could make the perfect decision based on the data you had on a Tuesday, but if the data changes by Friday, you look incompetent to an auditor.
To fix this, the system must capture an immutable audit trail snapshot.
How does that work?
When the analyst clicks Approve or Close on a case, the platform literally takes a digital picture of the exact data state, the specific alerts that were visible, and the precise risk scores at that exact second in time.
And it just saves it.
It locks that snapshot in a vault. So when the examiner asks about it 6 months later, you can instantly recreate the exact visual environment the analyst was operating in.
That alone would save compliance officers countless sleepless nights.
Without a doubt.
Which actually brings us to the final hurdle. We have investigated the entity, the AI's reasoning is fully explained, and we have an immutable snapshot locked in the vault.
Right.
But if the actual compliance paperwork isn't filed correctly and on time, this entire sophisticated process was basically for nothing.
And this is the seventh and final breakdown, treating compliance reporting as an administrative afterthought.
I can completely visualize this workflow breaking down. Like an investigator spends a week untangling a massive web of synthetic identities. They finally close the complex case. And then they open a blank Word document and stare at a blinking cursor.
Yep. Trying to remember all the intricate details from memory to write up a suspicious activity report. Or, a written statement of unauthorized debit at WSUD for a fraudulent ACH return.
And human memory is incredibly fallible.
Highly fallible. Reconstructing complex network cases days later leads to thin narratives, inconsistent details, and most dangerously, late filings.
Because FinCEN enforces a strict 30-day filing deadline for SARs, right?
Exactly. If you treat the report as a postscript, you will miss deadlines. And under the 2026 demonstrated effectiveness rules, late filings and poor quality narratives will result in severe examiner findings and potential fines.
So how do you fix it without just hiring an army of technical writers to follow the analysts around?
You integrate the output. You build the compliance report during the investigation itself.
Oh, like simultaneously?
Yes. This system should automatically assemble the SAR narrative, or the regulatory documentation, as a structured byproduct of the investigator's natural workflow.
How seamless is that, actually?
It's very seamless. Every time the analyst highlights a transaction in the graph and tags it as anomalous, the system auto-populates that data into a chronological narrative field in the draft SAR.
Oh, wow.
And when they link two entities together visually, the system automatically translates that relationship into text for the report. By the time the investigation is done, the report is already 90% written.
That is incredibly efficient. But is it fully automated?
No, and there is a non-negotiable rule here. There must be a human in the loop for final approval.
Because regulators won't accept an AI doing the filing.
Exactly. Regulators will not accept autonomous AI-submitted SARs. The AI acts as the drafter, pulling together the evidence, but the human analyst acts as the editor-in-chief. They review the narrative, ensure the explainable AI logic makes sense, and they are the ones who officially file it.
Okay, we've covered an immense amount of ground here today. We've outlined 7 massive structural breakdowns, from drowning in alert noise to the siloed departments, the engineering ticket trap, black box algorithms, and botched reporting.
There's a lot to take in.
It really is. If someone is listening to this right now, sitting at their desk and feeling totally overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the problem, where on earth do they start applying the gold lacquer to their kintsugi bowl?
The DataVisor playbook is very clear on triage. You sequence your investment based on your highest operational pain, not by whatever vendor feature looks the most appealing. You must triage the highest bleed.
Meaning, don't just buy the shiny new graph visualization tool because it looks cool in a demo.
Exactly. I mean, if your analysts are burning out and your queue never empties, your highest bleed is alert overload. Do not buy a flashy graph tool first, because your team won't even have the time to look at the graphs anyway.
Right, that makes total sense.
You need to invest in intelligent alert triage and AI pre-filtering to stabilize the queue first.
What about reporting issues?
Conversely, if your SARs are constantly being returned by quality assurance for poor narrative quality, your bleed is reporting. Start with integrated compliance outputs. You have to fix the specific foundation that is currently sinking your operation.
That is intensely practical advice. Well, let's bring this all together. Today, we journeyed from the nightmare of surviving 95% false positive alert queues to the necessity of building a proactive, explainable, and unified FRAML ecosystem.
A huge leap.
Absolutely. We've explored the mechanics of why old transactional rules cannot catch coordinated entity-level networks and how graph visualization exposes them.
And we learned that the 2026 regulatory standard is entirely about demonstrated effectiveness.
Right. You cannot just possess the tools anymore. You have to prove, mathematically and visually, exactly why your system works using immutable audit trails and human-readable AI.
It is a massive paradigm shift for the industry. You are moving from a posture that is inherently reactive, siloed, and opaque, to an architecture that is continuous, converged, and fully defensible to an examiner.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to ponder. We've established today that regulators now demand highly transparent, explainable AI. The system has to clearly and explicitly document, in human-readable terms, exactly which behavioral signals and data points it considers to be suspicious.
Because if it doesn't, it's an undefendable decision.
Right. But if an AI is required to explicitly document exactly what it catches and how it catches it, well, how long until highly organized criminal networks start using their own AI models to study those exact explanations, reverse engineer the logic, and generate the mathematically perfect, undetectable synthetic identity?
You've been listening to What the F Happened? Fraud and Financial Crime Deconstructed, a Defend podcast by DataVisor. If you want to keep learning between episodes, check out Defend Training, a set of self-paced online courses for fraud and financial crime professionals, practical and built around real-world scenarios.
And you can earn CPE credits through the ACFE San Francisco Bay Area chapter. You can find it at datavisor.com/defendtraining. The link's in the description.
This episode's audio was generated using Google's Notebook LM, based on expert analysis and trusted sources. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.